Hi everyone, welcome back to the audit session, and today we will be discussing the specialist in our audit. So what are the uses of the specialist, when do we appoint a specialist in our audit, and what are the audit procedures when there is the involvement of the specialist in the audit. So let's understand that. Auditor specialist, so individual or organization with expertise in the field other than the accounting or auditing, whose work in that field is used by the auditor to obtain the sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So if we are auditing, then we as auditor are expertise in auditing and accounting, but there are other areas in the financials such as taxation, valuation, investment, in which auditors are not expertise. So in that case, we appoint the specialist in our audit. So they are expertise in their field. For example, appraiser, actuary, attorney, engineer, IT professional, or tax practitioner are the specialist. May be either an auditor's internal specialist or the auditor's external specialist. So they can be internal from the firm they are working, or externally appointed by the firm or auditor. So note that auditor has the sole responsibility for the audit opinion, and that responsibility is not reduced by the auditor's use of the work of an auditor's specialist. So whatever auditor's specialist gives opinion on that respective area, by that auditor's opinion on the overall financial statement doesn't decrease, and auditor is himself or herself responsible for the opinion on the financial statement. Requirements when using an auditor's specialist. So determine the need for the auditor's specialist. So when we need the auditor's specialist in our audit. So specialist may be needed if the expertise in a field other than the accounting or auditing is necessary to obtain the sufficient appropriate audit evidence. For example, fair valuation of complex securities, PP&E, jewelry, work of arts, actuarial calculation of the liabilities associated with the employee benefit plans, analysis of the complex or unusual transaction compliance issues, interpretation of the contracts, determination of the physical characteristics. So these are the few areas, examples where we appoint a specialist in our audit. So we should evaluate the competence, capability, and objective of the specialist that has been appointed. By competence, we understand the nature and their level of expertise, like qualification, license, and the experience that they have to provide their expertise opinion on the particular heading of the financial statement. Capability, ability to exercise the competence in the circumstances of the engagement. And objectivity, so ability to perform the task without bias, conflict of interest, undue influence. So the objectivity is to provide the perform the task without any biasness or conflict of the interest. So in that case, inquire of the entity and auditors specialist about any known interest relationship. In case of any threat to objectivity, discuss with the auditors specialist for the applicable safeguards that reduce the threats to the acceptable level, and if objectivity may be impaired due to the relationship between the entity and auditors specialist, auditor may perform the additional procedures with respect to the sum or all assumptions, methods, or findings of the specialist to determine if the findings are reasonable or not. Similarly, to obtain the understanding of the auditor's specialist field of expertise, to enable the auditor to determine the nature, scope, and objectives of the work of the auditor's specialist and evaluate the adequacy of the work. Agreement with the auditor's specialist regarding, there should be proper agreement regarding the nature, scope, and objective, respective roles and responsibility, nature, extent, and timing, and need for the auditors specialist to observe the confidentiality of the requirements. So, agreement is prepared when the specialists are appointed. Similarly, evaluate the adequacy of the work of the auditor's specialist. So, or evaluate the relevance and reasonableness of the findings and conclusion of the auditor's specialist and their consistency with audit evidence. So, there are specific procedures which may include the inquiries of the auditor's specialist, inspect the working papers and the reports of the specialist, perform the corroborative procedures such as Observe the work of the auditors specialist, inspect the published data such as statistical reports, also confirmation of the relevant matters with the third parties, analytical procedures, reperformance of the calculation, this can be performed. Or discuss with another specialist with the relevant expertise when, for instance, the findings or conclusion of the auditor's specialist are not consistent with another audit evidence. If the work of the auditors is specialist involves the use of significant assumptions and methods, then in that case, it is necessary to obtain the understanding of those assumptions and methods and evaluate the relevance and reasonableness of those assumptions and methods. If the work of the auditors specialist involves the use of the source of the data that is significant, then in that case, evaluate the relevance, competence, and accuracy of that source of the data. Also, if the auditor determines that the work of the auditor's specialist is inadequate, auditor should agree the auditor's specialist on the additional work to be performed by the specialist or perform the additional audit procedures appropriate to that circumstances. Also, no reference to the auditor's specialist in auditor's report if unmodified opinion is there. So, however, in the case of the modified opinion on the auditor's report, it may be appropriate to refer to the auditor's external specialist to explain the nature of the modification. So, if there is unmodified opinion, the reference of the specialist is not required, but if the opinion is modified, there should be the reference of the specialist involved and the work they have done. Similarly, but auditor may need the permission of the specialist before making such references. Also, after auditors specialist, there is also the management specialist that management has hired in their work for any special areas, any expertise where expertise was required. So, a management specialist is the one whose work in a field other than the accounting or auditing is used by the entity to assist the entity in preparing the financial statement. So, if information to be used as audit evidence has been prepared using the work of the management specialist, then the auditor should evaluate the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of the management specialist. When evaluating the objectivity of the management specialist, it may be relevant to inquire of the management and the specialist for any interest relationship that may create threat to the specialist objectivity and applicable safeguards. Also, if objectivity may be impaired, auditor may perform additional procedures with respect to the sum or all of the assumptions, methods, or findings of the auditor's specialist to the determine the findings are reasonable or not. Also, in this case, obtain the understanding of the work of the management specialist and evaluate the appropriateness of the management specialist as the work evidence. So this was all about the specialists. So auditors specialist and management specialist, their roles, their audit procedures, and how can we use their work in our audit procedures, where the disclosure is required and where disclosure is not required. Everything is properly explained to you, and please let me know if you have any queries in the comment section. I will help you out. In next chapter we will move forward to our audit session, and let's stay connected for the next chapter. Till then, bye and take care.